This podcast is brought to you by PodSpot Events.
What's the best time of day to train? What should you eat before you train to get the most out of your training session? And should you train through pain? These are just some of the questions we unpack in this episode with Dave Marsh. Dave is an online fitness coach, and full disclosure, Dave is my online fitness coach. I've been working with Dave for about 1.5 years now, and we thought it was a really good time to get Dave on the podcast to chat all things fitness and how to get the most out of your training sessions. This episode is sponsored by Remote and Chief Nutrition, but I'll tell you a bit more about both of them later. As always, remember to give us a follow on Instagram at the Bondi Podcast to stay up to date with all of our guests and episodes. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and you'll find all of our episodes on Spotify. Cheers. Dave Marsh, welcome to the Bondi Podcast, mate.
Thank you for having me, Chris.
Dave, first question we ask all our guests. What is your favourite thing about Bondi?
I think it's every Brit's dream to come to this side of the world. And when you finally get here and realize just how picturesquely beautiful the nature is here, it's just stunning. And I think you can have like one of the most stressful, worst days or busiest days in the world. And you finish your day, you come down to Bondi and you look into the ocean and go for a sea dip and just all of that stress just melts away. And there's something quite magical about that. And then just the people as well, I think. Some of the most interestingly unique people are in Bondi, and that's obviously why you probably started the podcast as well, to have conversations with the people of Bondi. But you go down there at sunrise and there's a guy that just brings out his stereo system and starts rocking out and doing the most wildest of dances. And you just gotta love that. Like, the guy just doesn't care. He's in his flow. He's bringing so much energy. And there is a certain energy about Bondi that you can't help but love and enjoy and just kind of fall in love with the place. And it's quite special.
That's one of my favourite things, is all those random characters.
Yeah.
That you get. You get all like the normal people who go about their day to day. You know, they'll go to the gym and they'll go to all the restaurants and bars. But it's those really, really quirky characters that I absolutely love. I've got a new favourite, and I saw him this morning as I was walking down the promenade, sort of the car park in front of the pavilion. This guy was wearing a leather T-Birds jacket, you know, from Greece.
Yeah.
Cowboy hat and an eye patch, and he was directing traffic. I was like, you're my guy. This was at like 7 a.m. And he was trying to direct traffic as well. He was wearing nothing under the leather jacket, just the leather jacket, full of T-Birds embroidery. It was unbelievable.
It's amazing, isn't it? And it's just that kind of like no one cares attitude, right? And
Yeah.
I think where we come from as well is just so unique. Like, I come from like countryside UK. Like, no one would ever dare to do that there. And you see that in Bondi, just rocking out, and the guy just give no fucks. And it's just like, that's amazing. So
Yeah.
that in itself, man, is amazing.
It's class. Dave, you've been in Bondi for a while now, and one of the questions I've started asking some of my guests is, what would you change?
God, that's a hard question.
You can't say the rent prices either, mate. Everyone said that.
I mean, that would be nice. What would I change? Do you know what? I think it's there's a negative kind of like element of Bondi, which is the kind of pretentious side of it as well. And I think that is probably the only part that I would change. Like, I always chat to people in my apartment block or try and say hello, and it's just some people just don't want to have a conversation. And it's that level of openness, I think, is what's missing sometimes at Bondi. Like, I think the people that get up at sunrise and do that side of it are very quite open. You see that very much community side of it. But outside of that, there's an element of kind of like entitlement, stiff upper lip, whatever you want to call it, where people just don't want to have like normal conversations with you, or they think they're a little bit above you kind of thing, which is the element that I don't like. So if I was going to say anything, it'd be that. That's the only qualm with Bondi, and obviously rent prices, but we can't change that.
Yeah. I can definitely relate to that one as well. Something I've noticed, especially coming from like the UK, where, you know, there's more of a culture of saying, oh, hey, except for London. It's saying like, oh, hey, how you doing? Hey, morning, stuff like that.
Yeah, it's just like even just jumping in the elevator, and it's like, you live in the same building. They're your neighbors.
Yeah.
Why would you not want to like have a conversation with them, or just like actually generally have an interest? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like, we live next to each other. It's fine.
Yeah.
But they just,
Fair enough, mate. This question's, this is going to be like our jumping off point into the fitness industry, Dave, but it's kind of linked. So you've worked in the fitness industry for like a long time as well.
14 years.
Yeah, you've probably seen a lot of change from when you started in the fitness industry to where it's at now. Certainly that rise of social media and how intertwined it is with the fitness industry. What pisses you off currently about the fitness industry? There's a lot of information out there.
Mate, I've come from a background of like when I first got into the fitness industry, my dad, when I told him I was going to be a personal trainer, he looked at me and just like, why the fuck are you going to be a personal trainer? You know, you're not going to go and study something like law or, you know, go and actually have a serious career. You're going to go walk in the gym and like teach people to lift weights. So I was just like, he just didn't believe me, right? And when I got into the industry at that point, I guess the gyms were very different as well. Like it was predominantly cardio equipment. There was group fitness classes, you know, Les Mills was huge, which is like a style of group fitness where it's kind of like, you know, you had your body pump and body fit, that type of stuff. The weights area was tiny. And, you know, women as well didn't lift weights. That was very much the thing at that time when I got into the industry. And there's been a huge change in the last 14 years, all for the positive. The negative is definitely from the social media side of it. And the reason I say that is because, you know, when I got into the industry, you know, I was so passionate about learning and education. I spent the time in between like teaching clients and working with clients at the time, it was reading, implementing training methods myself and going through those processes. Now these days, you know, people, if you want to get big into fitness and actually have online clients, it's let's say you just start social media, you post content. If you are into fitness, this now automatically almost qualifies you as an online fitness coach if you post content online, and people just sell programs without real qualifications, without real, I guess, true understanding of working with a client, how we can potentially look at their problems, injury risk, you know, look at kind of length, tension, relationships and range of motion in joints, which we'll get into probably later in the podcast. And like, okay, you are putting someone's health in another person's hands and you're selling a product that is supposed to help this person. And you could be really hurting that person and kind of like fucking them up in the, you know, the wildest ways that you don't know about. And I think because I come from a background of taking it very seriously in terms of what I do, and you know, taking someone's health in my hands is like, I'm gonna take that pretty seriously, because you know, at the end of the day, you can make a really positive change to someone or you can make a really negative change to someone. I think there's a lot in the industry now on social media where you could be causing, you know, eating disordered behaviors. You know, you're going to be hurting people with exercise or training programs which have no thought process. You know, obviously you're a client of mine as well. The reason you probably came to me was because, okay, you know, this guy knows what he's doing and he can actually kind of get you from A to B, right? And you can probably tell me a bit more about why you came to me in that regard. But I think social media now has opened the floodgates for anyone, and the barrier to entry is so low and it's not regulated. And that means that anyone and anything can be put online, and you know, we can market product. And I know you kind of listen to the Diary CEO podcast, people like Liver King, right? Dude is on so much stuff, right? And he's just a marketeer that has been kind of put in front of people. There's this huge jack guy selling, you know, liver supplements, and he called himself the Liver King. And it's like and he's sworn that he's completely natural and taking anything, and then they found his blood work and it was just like an endless list of steroids and things he was taking, and you're just like, and people buy it, right? And that's the problem now, I think, with social media. It's just like, because it is a marketing tool, and don't get me wrong, it can be a very positive one, it can also be a very negative one, because people focus so much now on the marketing side of it, they forget what actually being a fitness coach and a personal trainer and coach is actually about.
So just how prevalent, Dave, is that? And when I say is that, I mean these fitness influencers on social media flogging cookie cutter training programs and nutrition programs without any qualifications.
How prevalent is it? I think it's more prevalent than not, right? And I think now, because there are so many like white box fitness apps that kind of people can pay for, so it's just like these white box fitness apps, they literally work with you to build an audience, promote you as a influencer. And then they can kind of like build the system that means you don't have to do any work. So all you have to do is market yourself. And that means if you're in good shape and you can market yourself online and grow a following, you've got then a funnel into an app that's going to allow you to train. And there's no real thought process behind that. They'll handle all the emails, they'll handle all the messaging. It's not actually the person you think you're signing up with.
Wow.
It's someone on the back end just doing that back end work.
Really?
Oh yeah. It's very much that, man. And it's like, you know, I've been approached a couple of times by like these sort of things, and you know, they kind of take you through how they work, and you're just like, this is wild, it's insane.
Tell me more about that.
What, in terms of them reaching out to me, or just how they work?
Yeah, that process, I had no idea.
Yeah, so it'll be like a 70-30 split, right? So you know, it'll be kind of like similar to what you would pay on like a gym rent. So obviously, when you like go to a gym, you maybe, you know, 30% of that will go to the company, and then 70% you get to keep as a trainer. Right, so these white box apps, you will sign a contract, so you'll pay like a set fee or whatever it is, And then, the company will take 30% of all your total revenue, and that will be their fee. And then the online coach will get 70%, and they'll help do the marketing and all the back end, and they'll have the email system set up, the automated messaging and all that kind of stuff. So you literally don't have to touch anything as the kind of influencer or marketer on the back end.
But the programming's all done by someone completely different,
Of
not
course.
the influencer.
Yes. And there'll be automated meal plans, all that kind of stuff. And it's just like, plug in your macros and
Wow.
Yep.
Blow my mind here, Dave. Have you heard any horror stories, Dave? Have you heard about where this cookie cutter, no qualifications approach goes wrong? Injuries or eating disorders or anything like that?
Definitely, I think from an injury standpoint, for sure. Because again, like, it's not really monitored in a way. And even like, and again, we can kind of get into kind of like scaling a fitness business. I think scaling a fitness business is really hard to do in a really roundabout way. And I think, as a coach, like, I cap myself at a certain number of clients because I can't reach anything more than that. Otherwise, quality will drip, and I'm not going to be able to kind of like, again, facilitate those clients solely as an own trainer, right? Doesn't matter how good your systems are. I think, you're going to have a certain limit that you can do. I think a lot of the guys that blow up big on social media, they build out a team, and that's when, again, the quality is going to drop. And even I've had clients come to me that have been in reputable programs from other online coaches or systems or whatever, and projects that people run, but they've had a really poor experience where, they've been working with the coach and, their calories and macros haven't changed for 8 to 10 months. You know what I mean? And they've been on super low calories. And then, we understand that if you're on low calories for a long amount of time, you could be affecting your hormones negatively. It's going to be a rising cortisol. You're in something called low energy availability, which is going to affect you on a multitude of levels. And nothing's changed and nothing's been done. So I think the ball can drop really easily with scaling a fitness business. And that's why I like to keep my finger on the pulse of all my clients, as you well know.
Just a quick word from me, guys. We're making some progress, Bondi podcast listeners. We're up to 450 followers on Spotify and 150 subscribers on YouTube. I would love to get both of those numbers closer to 500 across both platforms. So I've got a quick favor to ask. If you haven't, could you please quickly pause this episode, go and hit the subscribe and follow buttons on both platforms. It really helps with the show and ensures we can keep bringing quality guests and episode to you guys. Cheers. When I sort of made the decision to start working with you, it was quite an innocuous sort of situation. We bumped into each other walking the promenade. You asked me a simple question, how's the golf going, Chris? And I was like, I've not played in a very long time. My back's fucked. And you're like, you took a bit of a look at me, did a bit of an assessment on, how everything was sort of sitting and facing and placed. And then you said to me, the line that I think was the thing that sort of sold me to start working with you. You said that you specialize in getting people from pain to performance, and that really resonated with me. So at that time, couldn't play golf, couldn't squat, couldn't deadlift. Very shortly after we'd been working together, I was actually able to do all those things again. So thank you for that.
You're welcome.
I suppose my question is initially, what are some of the most common injuries clients come to you with, or maybe develop throughout their training?
Yeah, amazing. I think it's a really good question. And I just, on the back of your point there, and I think just from an assessment standpoint, I think when the clients are coming on board, like, everything starts with an assessment, right? And that was the one thing I did with you when you came on board. It was like, okay, let's actually look at your posture. Let's actually do hip, shoulder, spine assessments and see where you're sitting. And I think that stuff's really important and invaluable as well, like for a lot of people to actually see how their bodies move in space. Right. And that gives you a good understanding then to be prescriptive with the exercises you're programming to put people into the right place. And this is where I think, again, the online fitness can be, scaling an online fitness business or influence really misses the play, right? It's like, how can you just cookie cutter throw out a exercise program to someone when you haven't seen how this person moves or their posture? And that's going to mean that you could, like I said, be making something a lot worse if you don't know what's going on behind closed doors. When it comes to, I guess, the common pain, injuries, issues, like, we'll go through like hip, shoulder, spine, like lower back pain is probably the most common one, that I come up with, and we'll break it down. So when we look at kind of lower back pain, we're not just looking at the lower back. And I think that's where a lot of people, their eyes are going to go, okay, cool, lower back, I'm going to go get a massage, I'm going to get my lower back released, etc. That's the commonality, right? But we need to look at the kind of the system as a whole. What's going on? Why am I getting pressure applied to this point, to a point is causing me pain? So ribcage posture and pelvic posture is the most important thing. Like, are we stacked, or are we in a certain position that's going to be putting more pressure into my lower back. So, we see like a kyphotic posture, which is where you're going to see that kind of like upper back rounding. We're going to see maybe a lordotic posture, which is where you're going to see that kind of like anterior pelvic tilt, which is where that pelvis is dumping forward. And if we see that happen, obviously, you're going to be a little bit extended through your upper back. And then there's going to be a hell of a lot more pressure going into that lower back area just from where you're sitting on a day-to-day basis. All right. And then that's going to shut off the muscles around it. So if we think that's skeletal problems, we break it down, going into the muscular problems. It means abs are going to be in a lengthened position. So they're not going to be stabilizing you from the front. Lower back muscles are going to be shortened. So there's going to be a lot more pressure going through there. And all the surrounding muscles aren't going to be necessarily in a position to stabilize it. And one of the most common things when it comes to lower back pain is actually if you're lacking rotation at the hips. So if your pelvis is dumped forward, you're going to lack internal rotation. And there's been a lot of research that's come out about, okay, if you haven't got internal rotation at the hip, you're probably going to be quite likely to be causing some pressure put into the lower back as you're going to be compensating in those areas. And everything is a compensation. So if we're not in a correct posture, your body will compensate into these areas and mean that there's going to be a lot more applied force or pressure into those target tissues. So lower back's going to be taking a lot of load. Abs are going to be shut off. So what's going to stabilize? Your erector muscles at the back are going to have to do a harder job to actually stabilize your spine and keep you there. And that's when things are going to be like, okay, well, we can only take so much. And then it's going to set off some pain receptors. And our body's going to be like, we don't want to do this anymore. Right? So pain is a signal. And we need to remember that all it is like a check engine light coming on in your car going, okay, cool. Well, if something's wrong, you should probably go and actually get it checked out by a mechanic. And that's all it is. And a lot of people don't look at it like that. They're just like, oh, pain. Fuck. That's my day to day. I'm just going to crack on and ignore it. And I think that's half the problem with a lot of the kind of injury side of it. It's just like, if you're in a little bit of pain, that's a signal that, okay, something is not right. And if you need to do something about it, we can get onto that. So that's your lower back. And then the other...
So Dave, just on lower back before we move on, like, why is that a common injury in sort of today's society, I suppose? Where's that coming from?
I mean, we're sat right here, right? Most people spend most of their time just sat in this position. Okay, we're sat down. Day to day, we're at our desk. So we're kind of at our desk rounding over. Okay, so upper back is going to be in that rounded, like I said, kyphotic posture. We're sitting down, so think about all the muscles that are going to be shut off when we're sat down in this position. Glutes are going to be shut off. Hamstrings are kind of in this hip flex, shortened position, so hamstrings are going to be shut off. So of course, then because we're stuck in these positions, when we then actually stand up and walk around, we're not necessarily going to be stacked with that ribcage and pelvis, where everything's going to be functioning well to actually put us in a good place. And the more time we spend in the positions, we're more going to see that compensation happen over time. So what we really need to think about is like, okay, if I'm spending certain positions or spending a lot of time in certain positions in my day, what am I then doing outside of that to then kind of like, I guess, recorrect that and take myself back into the positions I need to be in? And that's a really good way to think about your training as well.
So what can you do from that perspective then, Dave?
So I think if we think about like, if I'm in this position now where I'm actually hip flex and I'm sat down, I need to think about actually then lengthening out my quads and my hip flexors. So, think like, couch stretch, front foot elevated split squats or Bulgarian split squats, things that are going to actually lengthen that tissue and put you into a better stack posture, right? And the idea of that stacking is going to remove some of that kind of like tension through your quads and your hips. And that's going to allow you to get into a better position with your rib cage and pelvis. And then I guess the other one is then if we move up into your shoulders, it's like anterior shoulder pain. And your shoulder is one of the most complex joints in the body. Okay, so there's 4 different subcomponents of your shoulder. So we've got your scapular thoracic joint, you've got your AC joint, and then you've got your 2 other subcomponents of that. And we think about then how the shoulder moves. It's like we need that shoulder to be functioning well to actually move your scapula around your rib cage. And if we're currently sat in that kyphotic posture where things get jammed up and we can't move our scapula, we're going to get that anterior shoulder pain. Okay, so that's the most common one we get in the shoulder. And we need to think about, okay, well, what are we doing to get that scapula moving around the rib cage? Because if it's jammed, again, it's going to be putting pressure on the target tissue. And from a muscular standpoint, it's like if I'm standing here and I'm like rounding or sat here, pecs are going to get tight, lats going to be tight, and that's going to pull my shoulder further forward. And we need to think about, again, lengthening those tissues out. So from that, it's like, are we stretching our lats in lengthened positions? Are we getting into those overhead positions? So think about like a half kneeling landmine press where we're pushing up and pulling down, actually getting the scapula to move around the rib cage. Are we doing kind of like pull down positions as well and getting into that overhead position? Again, pec deck, pec flyers, where we're opening up our chest and our lats, or using rings to do kind of like a deficit push-up, where again, we're opening up that target tissue and just getting those things into length. Because again, the more we can open our chest up and get our shoulder blades behind the body, the more our scapulars can be able to move.
So this is all stemming from sitting, Dave.
Yeah.
Obviously, we live in a society now where, I don't know what the percentage is, but a high proportion of the working population are sat at a desk or sat down for a high proportion of their day. And you're saying a lot of these issues are actually stemming from that?
Stemming from that and inactivity. We live in a very sedentary population now. So if you look at the research on, what people are doing day to day and how active people just aren't as active as they used to be anymore. So that comes from, again, the modern day work life. We are spending more time sat down. We are spending more time behind our desk. Even myself now as a coach, as I move more into that online space, I myself spend a lot more time behind my desk and doing that side of work. So, I've got a sit-stand setup myself. And then I guess what's become relatively popular is these kind of walk pads as well, which I'm looking to get in myself as well. And again, it just keeps you moving, keeps you kind of actually
Gets your steps in, mate.
Gets your steps in, absolutely. And I think even though steps are a really good place to start, it can be quite challenging for a lot of people. And working with a vast variety of clientele over the years I have, it's now a case of because we have got busier, people don't have time to do 10,000 steps. If you can do 10,000 steps, I'd say you're very lucky in the lifestyle you lead. Because a lot of people that I know work some crazy hours at work. They're working 10 to 12 hours. They might have kids, they might have family. It's saying to them, go and hit 10,000 steps a day, it's just not realistic for them. And then you've got people in the fitness industry going, oh, you're lazy if you can't do that. It's well, look at this person's lifestyle. Is that realistic for them to spend, 45, 50 minutes out there walking, when actually getting them into the gym and doing good exercise where you get stronger, opening up tissues, and maybe spending 15 minutes on the bike doing some high intensity work is probably going to be a lot more beneficial for them and the time they have to actually train.
So it's interesting, Dave, because it feels like you outlined a couple of problems there, lower back and shoulder, and it feels like the solution to those problems is get yourself into the gym and kind of do the opposite movement, which is fine for a guy like me who's someone who's active and willing to go to the gym 4 or 5 times a week. But yeah, that feels like it's an appropriate solution, as I said, for someone like me. But for the majority who will be at a desk 9 to 5, never been in a gym in their life or have absolutely zero desire to go to the gym, how do we solve it for them?
Matt, that's a really good question. And this goes back to, so the guy called Stuart McGill, he's the expert on spinal health and hygiene. So he came up with something called the McGill Big Three. So that's looking at, if we want kind of trunk stability to kind of, stabilize the trunk and the lower back, there's going to be 3 exercises that you can do. They're going to be progressional that you can do that should create stability and strength around the trunk. So starting with, it's called a McGill curl up, which is basically just a very small crunch. So you lie on your back, knees bent like you would in the sit-up position. You're going to have hands on the floor. And you're literally just going to kind of pull yourself up. So pulling that top of the rib cage to pelvis and closing that space. You're doing this really small close. And that is your basic level progression. Once we're able to do that, you can do it well, then we can move into just a plank position. So you can start on your knees and just focus on actually holding that isometric contraction. So squeezing glutes, abs as hard as you can, stabilizing. So you're resisting force. Because you got to remember, day to day, we're always resisting gravity that's pushing us down. All right, so resisting that spinal flexion extension that you're going to get compressed from gravity is going to be really important. So just curl up, plank, that's going to be your spinal flexion extension exercises, anti-resistance exercises. We're then going to go into your side plank position. So again, your McGill side plank. So starting on your knees is your basic. And then you can move that and progress it up onto 4 legs up straight. And that's going to be working your obliques, which is going to stabilize you laterally. So create a little bit of stability there, put you into a better position. And then the other one is anti-rotation. So anti-rotation is going to be moving. So basic dead bug. So on your back, giving the floor a support, and then opposite arm, opposite leg, lengthening out to the floor, coming back in. And then you're going into your bird dog. So that's flipping over. So now you're starting in that kind of hands, knees, quadruped position, and then reaching out to the opposite arm to opposite leg. Finding your glutes on the way out there. And position, obviously, it'd be good if we could have some maybe videos to pop in on this, which would be cool, so you can actually see it. But that is going to keep you stable in your spine. And if you could do those 3 basic exercises, that's going to give you some spinal stability. If you're at home as well, we need to think about stretching out your quads. So again, just getting into a couch stretcher is going to be relatively easy. Everyone's got a couch at home. I would hope they have anyway.
So that's really targeted at people, Dave, who aren't necessarily comfortable going to the gym okay.
Yeah, 100%, man. That's going to be your basics. And I think those 3 things, if you can do, plank, side plank, and then bird dog, you know what I mean, at home on a day-to-day basis, that's going to provide you with some trunk stability and keep you in a good position.
Chief Nutrition have come on board as a sponsor. Chief Nutrition specialise in clean, healthy snacks that cut the crap. My personal favourite is the collagen protein powder. If you want to find out more about Chief Nutrition, listen to our episode with Veronica Larasova. And if you like what you hear, Bondi podcast listeners get 10% off all Chief products. Just follow the link in the show notes. Cheers. As part of your coaching collective, Dave, you set up a WhatsApp group relatively recently, and you said something in the WhatsApp group that really stood out to me, and I'm just hoping you can sort of elaborate on that tonight. And that thing was pain is a learned behavior. What do you mean by that?
Good question. So when we look at pain, and this is something I learned when I did Prescript, and Prescript is run by a collective of high-level coaches, clinician background, Jordan Shallows, aka the Muscle Dog, fantastic human. So he dove into the pain science and that side of it, which is kind of really interesting in understanding it. So we have something called nociceptors, which are basically a peripheral sensory neuron, which is going to be stimulated by either a change in pressure, a change in temperature, or a chemical change. So if you think about like when we experience pain, like I'm sure we all did this as a kid, we put our finger over a candlelight flame, and we get to a point where we're kind of playing with it, and then eventually it would cause so much pain we take away, right? So that's that change in temperature or internal temperature that is sending a signal to our brain to be like, okay, this isn't safe to be here anymore. Does that make sense? So if you think about like, again, like if we're looking at an injury, for example, like,
let's use my knee injury.
Yeah, we'll use your knee as an example,
yeah.
Right? After your knee injury, right, we knew you weren't in a fantastic posture. We had that hip hike going on. So there was a lot of pressure being applied to that knee joint. And there was some form of compensation in your body, which meant a lot of pressure was going into that knee. And that was sending a signal to your brain to be like, this isn't safe for you to load it. Okay, so when you're in a place of chronic pain, your body and nervous system is learning that it's not safe to be there, or there's a lot of pain, and that's going to be a learned behavior. So when we actually heal an injury and we fix the problem in terms of like actually getting past an injury, your nervous system and brain is still going to be like, do you know what? It's still not safe to go here. All right, because you've learned that there's pain when you do that movement or whatever it might be. So when it comes to then actually rebuilding back from an injury, we need to think about, okay, well, is it safe? Okay, have we actually healed the tissue or whatever the problem might be? Are we in a position that isn't going to be putting you in an unsafe position? And how can we then, I guess, neurologically hack your brain to be like, this is okay? So for example, if you got pain in like a split squat, if I got you to hold a tennis ball or even like a stress ball, that's something you could squeeze, what you're then doing is sending a signal with your hand by squeezing that ball and taking your brain away from the actual learned behavior that you've got pain in that area. That's going to allow you then to train that range of motion. And if we can train the range of motion that your body is not going to be in pain with and learn that, okay, it's safe to be here, your nervous system is going to actually relax and be like, you know what, this is okay now. Okay, so when we think about pain, it's like, okay, well, is there pressure being applied to this? Is there a change in internal temperature, or is there a chemical change? And the chemical change might be, a lot of buildup of potentially lactic acid. If you've done a drop set on a leg extension, you get that pain buildup, and you're like, that's a change in chemical. Okay, there's a chemical change going on in the body because of the lactate that's being produced, and your body's going, okay, we can't do this anymore, and it really fucking hurts. All right, so again, if we look at those three things, that's how we can understand how pain is, and then with the learned behavior side of it, it's the chronic injury or pain issue that's been there for a long time that we have to unlearn once we've healed whatever their injury that might be.
So if we take my knee as an example then, Dave, my knee could have been perfectly stable, healthy, fit, strong, but because I'm used to there being sort of associating a pain with my knee, I'm still feeling a pain in my knee when I'm exercising, even though there's probably nothing wrong with it.
100%. Yeah. There's going to be an element of kind of learned pain there, and also an element of fear as well. And I think you got to remember, like, emotions play such a big part in our pain system. It's like, okay, cool. If we have an emotional response to something, and I think most people do, if you've been in pain or you've had a really bad injury, right, we get very emotional. It gets us down. We get emotional about it. So there's going to be an element of fear that builds up around that we don't want to go there anymore, because again, it's going to prevent us from probably doing the things we want to do. And, we've had these conversations many times where, you get some pain or issues and different things that we've worked through with our coaching and how we train, and it gets you down because it prevents you from doing it, right? And therefore, there's that fear associated with that pain as well, the learned behavior that you just don't want to feel it there. So you're going to be ultra sensitive when you're doing stuff because you're nervous about doing it and letting that pain come back or injuring it, making it worse. So again, the more we can kind of, again, do things properly, heal the injury as such, and then get our nervous system to actually relax into the movement that allows us to train it, strengthen it, stabilize it, etc. If we've got joint range of motion, if we've got functional stability around that joint and we can move through range, then there shouldn't really be a reason for too much pain unless there is some stuff going on that we don't know about.
And if we don't have all of those things, Dave, that's when you probably wouldn't train?
Yeah, that's when we need to look at, okay, well, if we don't have joint range of motion, we need to look at that first. So joint range of motion is going to be, okay, can I move adequately around the joint? Okay, so when we think about, if we're looking at the hips, do we have adequate internal, external rotation at the hips? All right, do we have adequate movement at the foot as well, in terms of applying pressure there? If we don't have those things, we might need to do some opening drills. And this is where, again, we talk about mobility. So putting in some things that are going to open things up, allow us to create space to then train in those ranges. Then have we got functional stability? So are the muscles around that knee actually functioning stable? So is the hamstring working well? The quads working well? Have we got like a maybe overdevelopment of one or the other, which we know you had. So again, it's like, okay, well, we need to strengthen your quads. So we've got, again, stability because muscles work on a push and pull axis, right? We've got your agonist and antagonist. So when one muscle contracts, the other one on the opposing side relaxes and vice versa. So if you've got one really strong side of that muscle above your knee, that's going to have a push and pull effect on that knee joint as well. So we need to think about everything around it and surrounding it from a muscular and skeletal standpoint. In terms of the actual pain itself, it's like, okay, well, if you got pain in a certain range, how about we just limit that range of motion a little bit? Just pull back a little bit and train in the range we can. And then again, train your body to be like, you know what, we can actually start to go a little bit further, a little bit further, a little bit further, instead of not training at all. Because that's probably the worst thing you can do. Like most people, if they get an injury or they're in pain, they're just like, I'm not going to go train. And that's probably the worst thing you can do when it comes to this stuff. Is like, well, how about we train around it and do what you can do? That's going to have a positive effect long term.
Yeah, and I suppose that's something that we've put into practice, when we started working together, I was in a lot of pain with my back, but you sort of designed the program around managing that pain and getting everything into the right position before we actually start loading it up.
100%, man. And that's the thing. It's like, we need to get you into the right position before loading it. And I think that's a really important point, because if you're not in the right position, then if you start loading that, there's going to be a point where that load actually exceeds the tissue tolerance, and the applied force going to that tissue is going to be like, nah, this is not good. And then it's going to, you're going to get a lot more pain. That's what we don't want.
All right, David, let's talk about injury prevention then, and more specifically warm-ups. I suppose since working with you, my warm-ups are very different to maybe how they were, I don't know, maybe like 10 years ago. I feel like my warm-ups are more dynamic. It's more targeted at engaging muscle groups rather than holding a quad or hamstring stretch for 8 to 10 seconds, which kind of feels like what you were told in high school. You need to hold every single stretch for 8 to 10 seconds. I suppose where I'm going with this is it necessary to stretch before training?
I think it really depends, right? And I think it depends, and going back to what we kind of mentioned before, it's kind of like doing a systems check, right? So going back to that kind of like joint functionality and joint range of motion, right? If we're lacking range of motion at a joint, then we probably need to make sure we create a bit of space there before we go and train. Because again, everything's going to be compensation. So if we're not in the right position to start with, we need to spend a bit of time increasing that range of motion so we can train in that range. Because if we open space and train in that range, it's going to reinforce that and go and allow us to actually keep that. And our nervous systems will be like, okay, cool, this is fine to train in this range. And this is where the kind of common myth of actually training makes you stiff and muscles make you stiff. It does if you don't train properly, right? If you actually train properly and you train in a full range of motion and pause and end ranges, muscles shouldn't really make you stiff. It's usually a human error as to why people get stiff if they're, training muscles in the wrong way. So when we're warming up, it's like I use the kind of like 4 R's. So I'm looking at kind of relaxing the nervous system. So when we think about like making a change, whether that's to our muscular system or a muscular system or our kind of actual skeletal system, put us into a better position, we need to relax our nervous system. And most people coming into the gyms, they probably had a big day at work. They're probably coming in highly caffeinated because they went smashing pre-workout and coffees prior to training, which isn't a bad thing for performance, but we're coming in pretty ramped up. All right. And our muscles are going to be a little bit more spasmodic, which is going to be like super tight and tender. So starting with some breathing drills, which we've incorporated a lot, breathing into these positions is going to relax those muscles. It's going to allow things to calm a little bit down and create a little bit of space around that joint. Then we're going to think about, okay, well, can we actually reposition or realign? So that's when I talk about that. It's like, okay, well, let's get that ribcage and pelvis stacked. Okay, so can we actually improve the relationship between ribcage and pelvis, get that stacked? Let's stretch whatever we need to stretch. Let's activate all the muscles that we need to activate if we've been sat down all day to put us in a better position. And that's going to allow us then to actually then reintegrate whatever movement pattern it is we're then going to train. And then we'll look at raising. So raising is just going to be raising that core temperature. So this is where we might put in some plyometric work to start actually kind of training that stretch shortening cycle. So again, get a little bit more explosive, eccentrically loading, which is where you're going to absorb force and then produce force, and actually incorporate that into a warm-up that's going to be specific to what you're training. Like if you're training lower body, you're not going to go in there and start doing kind of like kettlebell swings and like windmills. You're going to go, okay, well, I need to open up my hips. I need to activate my hamstrings, my glutes, and get the muscles surrounding whatever it is I'm going to train actually on to stabilize that movement so I can perform those movements well. So everything needs to be specific and also progressional, right? Some of the stuff we started with, it was very basic, kind of on the floor, breathing drills where we're actually on the floor lying down. Now it's like, okay, you're stable, you're strong, you're moving better. We can start playing around with these warm-ups and making them a little bit more functional, right? Let's get you overhead. Let's get you hanging. Let's get you doing some kind of like knee raises, toe to bar type stuff, windmills where we're rotating through your spine. Let's challenge you in these positions so we're keeping those positions.
Is there still a place in the warm-up, Dave, for holding long stretches?
I think so. Yeah, for sure. I mean, again, it's like depending on where you are stuck. Right, so if someone is a starting client of mine and they're stuck in a certain position, we need to create a lot of space at the hip or whatever it is and actually make a big change. We're going to front load the kind of accessory work and stretching. So we might go like a long hold couch stretch into a front foot elevated split squat. And this is something I learned from Luke Layman, the muscle nerds. It's like structural backloading. So structural backloading is where you're going to kind of put a lot of lengthened positions and stretching into the front of the workout. And then you might put your squat right at the end of the workout once we've opened up space, we've improved positions, we've activated those muscles, and then your main lift is actually at the end of the workout rather than the start. Whereas you go online and most fitness influencers will be like, start with the squat. It's like, well, that's all well and good, but if you're in the wrong position, you're starting with a barbell on your back, that's going to push you into a bad position.
Man, there's nothing worse than saying let's squat at the end of your session after you've done everything. Dave, the next thing I wanted to talk about, high rocks. Very popular these days. It's something that, as my coach, you're helping me work toward at the minute. We've sort of phased our training in the build up to the high rocks this weekend. I know some people that train high rocks style training all year round. Is that the right approach?
I think like any competitive sport, you need to be periodizing your training. Okay, so we need to break down what that looks like. You're going to have your actually like competition phase, which is where you're going to be, okay, that's going to be very specific to the competition in terms of replicating whatever that might look like in terms of the race or performance or sport you're actually competing in. That phase of training needs to be really specific to that. And then if we break down what the rest of the periodization looks like, when you first came to me, it's like you came to me with an injury. So first phase is going to be, okay, we need to actually fix the kind of movement side of it. Work on functional stability and actually get you into better positions. We then need to rebuild functional strength. So actually do a phase where we're fixing kind of like functional hypertrophy training. That doesn't mean bodybuilding. That means actually growing some tissue and muscle around the areas we need to grow. And then we can move into your strength. And whilst we're doing this, we're building a level of kind of like base level aerobic endurance. So I had you doing a lot of kind of like low intensity, steady state cardio. So into work, building up that aerobic base. So we've got that there. So when we start progressing through these phases, we can go into more strength interval work where we start kind of progressing those zones up and ramping you up and improving that kind of like anaerobic system. And then we can start moving towards, okay, well, now we've got that base, we're strong, we can train other components, right? We can't do speed, agility, power work without being strong and stable. Because if you start doing that kind of stuff when you're not strong and stable, you're going to pick up injuries, you're going to pick up problems, you're not going to be able to actually train those capacities in the way you want it without picking up an injury. And it's my job as your coach. It's just like, okay, well, I want to get this guy performing. I want it to be strong. I want it to be powerful. I want it to be fast. It's like, okay, well, we got to kind of go straight right back to the beginning and kind of build a plan that's going to make sense when it comes to going through those different phases and how they translate into progressing each phase in the right way. So when it comes to your question about, okay, well, should Hyrox be trained all year round? Potentially it can be, but not at the level that some of these guys do it if they want to be the best in terms of performance. Because like, okay, well...
So Dave, you've coached a number of people that have competed at the Hyrox World Championships, for example. Like, I assume they don't Hyrox train all year round, they periodize.
Absolutely. There's going to be elements of what they do is going to translate into Hyrox in terms of that, but they're going to look at, okay, well, we probably need to build more of an aerobic foundation or improve those capacities, or we might need to improve like our strength capacities, because if you want to get faster, you're going to need to be stronger. Okay, so that means we're probably going to have to pull back on the higher intensity, Hyrox style, race replication style workouts, and actually focus our attention on actually improving strength qualities. So if we're improving strength qualities, as you well know, it's like, okay, well, we're going to need to do some kind of like lower volume, higher intensity loading, which is going to like actually stress your nervous system a hell of a lot more. So we need a bit more rest between that sort of stuff. That doesn't mean I'm going to be going running straight into, an exercise. That means I need to be like, okay, well, I'm going to take at least 3 to 5 minute rest between my working sets of that heavy load to progress those strength fundamentals.
I feel like there is a lot of people that fall into that trap of just, smashing out 4 HIIT workouts a week. You must encounter them in your day-to-day, Dave, within the industry. What sort of issues do they come across?
Mate, high intensity interval training is an interesting one, right? Because I'd argue that a lot of people don't actually train true HIIT style workouts. Because if you've ever done a true HIIT style workout, you are coughing up blood on the floor pretty much because you were in that much pain. And that's the thing. It's like, I think we kind of like fall into this trap of being like, okay, well, this is high intensity interval training. It's like, if you're going max balls to the walls, and I did it with my guys last weekend, which you didn't make it to, but we did like 1 minute max effort on the assault bike, right? If you do 1 minute max effort calories on the assault bike, you are fucked, right? The guys maybe do it with them. And I was like, I haven't done this in a while. And my quads were burning. The lactic acid was there. And it probably took me about, I'd say 3 to maybe 5 minutes to actually fully recover from that. Like, that is true HIIT training, right? You're pushing your body at that kind of 100% max effort to a point where your body is building up so much lactate, it fucking burns. And it takes a bit of while to actually recover from that as well. So we need to think about, okay, well, most people don't train at that level of intensity, let's be honest, right? You see very few people doing it to that level where they're pushing their bodies to the point where they need to take 3 to 5 minutes break between those intervals. So what they're doing is kind of like, they're sitting in that kind of maybe like zone 4 work, and that you can train.
So they can get through the entire session. So if they go to a group fitness class and it lasts an hour, they need to make sure they have enough in the tank.
Exactly. Yeah, they're keeping their heart rate up, but they're not training true HIIT qualities.
Right, okay.
Right, and again, this is where we look at the kind of different zones, and if you look at your energy systems, we have an aerobic system, then we anaerobic system, and that's going to be utilizing different things like obviously creatine. Everyone knows about creatine and taking that as a supplement. Creatine works on a phosphate-creatine energy system. So that is basically, creatine is stored in the muscle with the phosphate molecule. So that is our 0 to 10 seconds of energy. So by supplementing creatine, we actually have more creatine phosphate stored in the muscle. And then when we actually want to create energy, we have something called a Krebs cycle. And again, we go into the biochemistry. So ATP is our first point of call when it comes to energy. What happens is the phosphate molecule breaks from the adenosine triphosphate, and that breaks down to adenosine diphosphate too. And then what the creatine phosphate does is they break apart and then replenishes that phosphate molecule. So we then have more ATP. So that's our 0 to 10 seconds energy. So if you think about, if we got a bit more creatine, 10 seconds, that's probably maybe like an extra 2 reps. All right. And that's how that system works.
So what would a true HIIT style workout actually look like then, Dave?
I mean, if you're training at that kind of like max effort, it's going to be, all right, you might, and it should always be progressive. So you're not going to go and do like crazy 1 minute, 100% efforts the whole time, right? If you really want to push up into that anaerobic system, you might do a bout of like 4 minutes of say like maybe 80-90% on the assault bike. you're then going to take complete 4 minutes rest. So it's a 1-to-1 work to rest ratio.
Right.
All right. If you start pushing up into that again, like 95, 100% mark, you're probably going to take a 1-to-3 work to rest ratio. All right. So it's going to be, like I said, I'll take a minute max effort. I take at least 3 minutes rest and repeat that. And that's going to be pushing up into that really top end of anaerobic system.
So there are not many group fitness gyms that are actually structuring their sessions like that.
100% not. Yeah.
That's interesting. That's interesting, man. Like I've been mixing up my training times recently, Dave. As you know, for the last 4 or 5 years, I've been like a morning trainer. Like I always like to train first thing in the morning, start my day off with a positive thing. More recently, I've been actually sort of switching up, training in the afternoon, and I'm actually having better sessions. Is there like a best time of the day to train?
Yeah, I mean, look, when I was, I guess, growing up in the UK, and when I was a personal trainer there, like I was a nerd when it came to the research and kind of like really following all that stuff. And there was a lot of really positive stuff coming out around that, and I kept up to date with it. And if you look at the research, between that 2 to 4 p.m. mark seems to be what is classed as optimal. So when we wake up, if we look at the kind of, again, what systems are on, cortisol is going to be relatively high. So stress is going to be a little bit higher. We're also
when you wake up?
When you wake up, yeah. So cortisol is going to be naturally a lot higher, and that's what naturally wakes us up. So it's why, like, again, delaying coffee a little bit is probably a good idea. We shouldn't really wake up and smash coffee straight away because it fucks around with that system. That's why people get that energy slump in the afternoon. So actually waking up, hydrating, allowing yourself at least 90 minutes or so before then having caffeine is a good idea, right? Also, you're going to be, if you're waking up and going straight into the gym, not only are you going to be high cortisol, but you're going to be relatively fasted as well. All right, there's not a lot of food in the system. And people who train in a fed state improves performance massively. We understand that. And I think there was a lot of stuff that came out when I used to train about, fasted cardio and, fasted training. And we understand that being in a fed state really does drive more output. And the myth around fasted cardio in terms of, like, again, weight loss and fat loss was the fact that actually it doesn't make a difference. It's actually been shown if you do fasted cardio, you're probably going to burn less calories because you're in a fasted state. So being in a fed state is super important when it comes to our performance. So if your goal is to get stronger, performance, and best your ability, training afternoon or having, a few meals in the tank is going to have a direct correlation with your performance and how you feel. Cortisol is not going to be as high in the afternoon. Actually, if we look at a male, your testosterone is probably going to be peaking then because cortisol's come down, so hormonally going to be in the better position. And then in the evening, it also gives you that time to wind down. So if we think about, okay, if we really want to perform as an athlete, it allows us to eat after, get a couple of meals in after, and then have that time in the evening to kind of wind down and actually relax and actually recover in a better way. Whereas most people, they kind of like rush their workout in the morning, go straight into a day of work, they're in that stress state. And if we think about recovery happens when our bodies rest and digest and now in a parasympathetic state. So we need to think about, okay, well, have we got time in that state? Have we got time to relax our nervous system? And are we feeding the muscles to perform? Or are we actually kind of getting up and going straight into workout? So if you can train in the morning, eat a banana, have some dates or something before, maybe have like a protein shake if you can stomach it. And that's the thing, like a lot of people don't want to stomach stuff in the morning, and that's also a problem. Not everyone has the ability or flexibility to train in the afternoon, and we need to think about, okay, each individual person, there's, a best time to train if we look at the research, but it's more about what's best for you. And I think that's really important to say, because I think we can really get caught in the weeds of kind of like what's optimal a lot of the time. And there's been a big push in recent years about optimality and how we can do X, Y, and Z to improve our health, performance, and everything else. And it's almost got a little bit too much that way, where we need to be like, okay, well, that's what's optimal, but realistically, is that going to fit my lifestyle? Because if it doesn't fit my lifestyle, I'm feeling bad about not doing this little tiny 1% thing that might have a small effect on my overall goal, whereas actually just showing up, working hard is going to have a better effect in a long-term time frame.
Yeah, so you got to make it work for your routine.
That's it,
to be perfectly honest with
you. Yeah.
And I suppose if you are a morning trainer, you might just have to make your peace with, okay, the research says the optimal time is 2 to 4. I'm at the office at 2 to 4. This is the only time I can get my workout in.
Well, that's it, man. And it's more about actually getting the workout in and working hard.
Yeah.
Right. Training intensity, and I think intention in training is one of the most important things. Right. And you know as well as I do, when you go to a gym, you look around and you see what people are doing. most people are on their phones. They're not being intentful with their training. Are they really thinking about the muscle they're working? Are they really thinking about getting as much out of this movement as possible, making every rep the same and all that stuff? Like, that's going to have a way more important effect on the overall outcome of their training session than the best time to train.
Dave, just another question popped into my head, and it's just more around, I suppose the reason it popped into my head is what you were just saying about focusing on reps. Do you have any views on training with and without music?
Do you know what?
Is there any research into it?
I haven't looked at the research, so I can't comment on that. There is research on making noises with your training. So the louder noise you make when you produce force, the more exertion you'll be able to create. So this is why tennis players, when they're hitting their racket, they are screaming.
Serena's going nuts, isn't
Absolutely.
she?
She is going hell for leather. And there's positive research to show the louder noise you make, the more you can exert force. So, this is why you see like powerlifters and people in the gym, that everyone used to like take the piss out of them. When they're walking up the squat bar, they're slapping themselves and like, rah!
Yeah.
Screaming the fucking bar down. It's like, that shit works. Right? And, everyone kind of takes piss out of them like, oh, bro, like you're making all the fucking noise. It's like, these guys know what they're doing. And there's a reason they do it. You know what I mean? It's like when I used to squat heavy and do strongman stuff, I would like, smelling salt, slap myself about, and I'd be fucking amped up for this, and I'd be going in hard. And it's like, you got to be ready for it. And I think when it comes to, I guess if we think about like, reps and what people are doing, it's like, you need to be ready for it. In terms of noise now, I actually wear the loop earplugs when I train. So I used to listen to music. Now I wear loop earplugs where I actually block out everything.
Why?
So I can be in more of that meditative state.
Okay.
All right. And when we think about like training and we go back to intention, it's like, I want to make every single rep count. I want to be fully locked in, fully focused, and thinking about, okay, how much mind-muscle connection can I get? And we live in such a distracted world now, Chris, right? We're always with our phones. We're always with this. It's like, I want to put my phone on do not disturb mode and actually make sure that, I can fully focus on the task at hand, not have any distractions. I want to think about, okay, well, how can I contract this muscle? How can I really think about getting the most out of every single rep and focusing on, okay, well, if I squeeze this as hard as I can, I'm going to create less, torque or tension through my tissues in terms of joint tissue. All right. And I'm going to get way more out of the muscle. So it means I'm probably going to need less load. I'm going to get way more work done, and I'm going to be able to have a way better workout. And it's like, that's good for me.
That's interesting. When did you start using the loop earplugs, Dave?
In the last probably 6 months.
And have you noticed like a difference with that mind-muscle connection?
Yeah, massively, man.
And in terms of not just how you feel, but like results-wise as well?
Yeah, definitely did. Definitely did, because I think I was... And again, we can talk about kind of social media and everything else. Like yourself, I'm a busy man, right? I work with a lot of clients. I'm always kind of like on, so to speak. So it's like, I need to put myself into a way calmer state now when I train. It's not when I used to, I grew up in the Cotswolds, beautiful part of the world, quiet. I used to, do my PT sessions in the morning, have my breakfast in the PT room, read a book, and then, train a couple of clients. And then I'd probably have a gap between like 1 and 5 p.m. So like 4 hours to train. Right, where I could, have my lunch, train, and then go for a walk outside, and then I do my couple of evening sessions and go home. And it was so much more relaxed, and that's why I was able to get so strong when I did and put on a little muscle, because like I had the most optimal setup. I just didn't know at the time. And then I come to Sydney and I'm like running around like a headless chicken. We're driven by social media, we're constantly stimulated.
Annoying clients like me asking silly questions.
You know what I mean?
Dave, my knee hurts.
Well, that's it, right? But it's, I've got clients now in I think like 8 different countries. It's right. So whatever time I look at my phone, I'm probably going to have a message to respond to. So, if you think about what that is doing to your nervous system and stress, it's like, I need to put myself in a state when I'm training where I'm calming my shit down so I can really focus on the task at hand. I'm not distracted. I can actually focus on connection and be present in what I'm doing. I honestly think that's one of the hardest things that people struggle with in today's world now. It's actually being present in whatever task it is they are doing, because they're so ramped up all the time.
Are you trying to grow your business or brand, but often find there aren't enough hours in the week? Have you considered hiring a virtual assistant to help with all those tasks that you don't want to do that could easily be delegated? I'm talking about admin, accounting, digital marketing, social media, and much, much more. Well, our show sponsors Remote provide businesses, entrepreneurs, and social media influencers with the top virtual assistant talent in the Philippines. If you're curious but still sitting on the fence, why not use the referral code BONDI to trial a virtual assistant for 2 weeks for absolutely free. That's 2 weeks, absolutely free. All you have to do is go to the website www.remote.com.au/contact, enter your details, enter the referral code BONDI, and someone from Remote will be in touch. I've added the link to the Remote website in the Instagram bio, and there's also a link in the show notes. And if you're interested in sponsoring the podcast, please get in touch with us over Instagram. Cheers. Dave, I suppose linked to trying to optimize your training, nutrition, what should you eat before a training session to get the most out of your session?
Yeah, good question. So nutrition, it's one of those topics where the internet and just overall social media has been interesting one for all this stuff. And like, I've been in the industry a long time. I've come from, do you know what? And I've tried shit in my younger years as well. Like growing up, you kind of, as stuff came into fruition, like I've done 5-2 diets. I've tried keto. I went vegan for a very, very short period of time. We're talking 1 week, and then I was like, I can't do this. I've tried a lot of the different protocols. And I think when it comes to nutrition, I've experienced enough, and I've kind of worked with enough clients to kind of see what works and what doesn't work. We're looking from a performance standpoint in terms of what you should be eating kind of prior and intra and then post-workout. We're going to think about, okay, well, we're probably going to need some protein, all right, because that's going to help, again, muscle recovery. And
this is pre, Dave?
Yeah, absolutely, man. So pre-workout, we're thinking like maybe hour and a half, 2 hours before training, depending how good your digestive system is. We want like a good amount of protein, like males versus females. Males, you're going to have probably around about 30 grams of protein, yielding about 5 grams of leucine, which stimulates something called MPS, or muscle protein synthesis. For a female, you're looking at maybe like 20, 25 grams, so a little bit lower, and again, to stimulate that same system in the body. And that's going to stimulate our system that's going to help with muscle recovery, repair, and damage. Okay, so when we go into that training session, we're already in a place where we are in more of a kind of like anabolic state. Because as soon as we start training and we start breaking things down, that's when our body goes catabolic, because that is how we break this down. So we need stuff to recover. Then we're going to need some carbohydrates, all right? And carbohydrates, again, we need them to fuel our performance. So going with easy digesting carbs is a good play. Like bodybuilders have been doing this for a very long time. Cream of rice seems to be the play. And it's just, again, a very easy digesting carb that's not going to cause a lot of digestive stress. It's going to sit well on the stomach, and that's going to allow us to kind of get a carb source in. And then we can go with some high GI carbs as well. So something like banana is a great play, and maybe a little bit like honey or maple syrup if you need a bit of extra like fast digesting carbs in there. That with some protein powder, like a whey isolate, which again is like lower digestive stress, really easily digesting. Perfect pre-workout. All right.
So about an hour and a half, 2 hours.
Hour and a half, 2 hours before.
Perfect.
That is, that's going to work well for someone who wants to run an endurance event. That's someone who wants to actually train well in the gym. Good ratio of protein, carbs, low amount of fiber, a low amount of fat. All right. Dark chocolate's always a good thing to put in as well. Just a little bit of dark chocolate, because again, it's a natural vasodilator, which means it's going to increase blood oxygen to the muscles. So again, you're going to get a nice little pump, all right, which is going to be good for performance. And then about 20-30 minutes before, that's when we can kind of look at, okay, well, we can put in something like maybe a few dates, a bit of Himalayan salt, because again, if we've got enough sodium, we need sodium to work with the carbohydrate to actually contract the muscle. So again, salt, we need that. Don't ignore it. Don't cut salt out completely. Put it in, because it's going to be beneficial to actually being able to contract
like
the muscle.
Salt on the dates? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, absolutely, man. Salty dates. Everyone likes salted caramel, right?
That's it, mate.
And then if we're looking at intra-workout, we want to be hydrated. And so hydration is so important. So making sure that we've got good hydration through that workout is going to be important. So if we're training for an hour, look at drinking at least a liter of water. I'm a big fan of coconut water, because again, you've got your electrolytes in there, potassium, magnesium, sodium, it's in there. We got a good amount of kind of like carbohydrate in there from the natural sugars. And again, it's keeping you hydrated. So it's a perfect combination.
Dave, you've talked a lot about like calming the nervous system before a training session. Where do things like coffee and pre-workout come in then? Good
question, man. Now, there's good research around coffee improving performance. Okay, so if you look at that from the performance side of it, coffee before performance is good. You're looking at about 3 milligrams per kilo of body weight. So, if you're a 75 kilo male, we're going to need about 225 milligrams of caffeine. So that's going to be your like optimal dose if we look at dosing. So for you, having that 45 minutes prior to training is going to improve performance, but we are going to ramp ourselves up. So this is where, again, if we want to go into a little bit of biohacking with supplements, something like L-theanine is good, because L-theanine actually kind of has the calming effect of our nervous system down and kind of smooth things out a little bit. So a little bit of L-theanine with some caffeine, fantastic pre-workout. All right, the other one I like as well, which I use for more kind of like a nootropic as a work standpoint, or even a focus when it comes to training, alpha-GPC works on a similar pathway to choline, which is something we find in eggs. So again, if you want to, again, be focused at work, eat eggs. All right, again, stimulate a lot of choline in there that's going to help kind of drive that kind of biochemical neurological signaling, which can help make us focus. So again, this is where we can use nutrition. That's really cool. And I think that's what I like about nutrition as well. Like, there's some incredible things we can find in food that's going to actually drive certain things in our bodies that's going to allow us to perform better, not just from a training standpoint, but cognitively as well. I think that's really cool.
And what about after training then, Dave?
After training, so again, similar, we want to kind of limit kind of fats and focus on protein, carbohydrates. And again, there's that kind of like anabolic post-window myth, which most people, you see guys in the gym, they finish a workout, they're, jacking off a protein shake.
My protein shake within 20 minutes. Is that not a thing?
It's not a thing, man.
Really?
So again, the research, since I've been in the industry, that was very much a thing. It was like, as soon as you finish your workout, just
20-minute window you've got, to get your 30 grams of protein in.
And then the research came out, it's more important to have protein prior to workout. So we understand now that actually when we ingest protein, you're going to actually bring your blood amino levels up for about 4 hours. Okay, so if you're having a pre-workout meal 2 hours before, train for an hour, you probably got about an hour window after to actually get some protein in. I'm not saying it's bad, because again, like as soon as you get kind of fuel in, you're going to go into more of that recovery state, but it's not the most important thing.
Okay.
Right. So, and again, back to the nervous system thing, it's like if you just came straight out of a hard workout and you're ramped up to shit and you start necking down a protein shake, is that going to sit well digestively? No, because we're not in that rest and digest state. Right. And this is something I used to do back in the UK. It was like when I finished my workout, I'd go for like a 10, 15-minute walk home. And again, didn't realize it at the time, but that was just optimizing my recovery, because it was actually relaxing my nervous system. I'd get outside, I'd get some sunlight, I'd walk home, and then I'd eat a meal after. And it was just calming that nervous system back down. So it put me in a really optimal state to then actually ingest food and digest that food that's going to help with the recovery. So after your workout, 5-10 minutes, maybe do some breathing, maybe jump on the treadmill, do some calming stuff. Don't just jump to your phone and start scrolling Instagram. It's going to ramp you back up. Let's think about, okay, well, can we actually just calm our shit down, do something that's going to relax our nervous system, and then we'll have a meal. And then that meal is going to be, again, focusing on that kind of like 4-to-1 protein to carb ratio. So if that's 25 grams of protein, what about 100 grams of carb? And that's going to be, if you look at the research, optimal for like a recovery.
One thing that you see walking around Bondi in the morning, Dave, is people have come out of like a group fitness class, or they've come out of the gym or a yoga studio or Pilates studio, and they go straight for the coffee shop and have a coffee. Is there any issues with doing that, or is it absolutely fine?
I mean, are there issues with it? No. Is it optimal? No. Right? So it's like if they're going fitness in group fitness class and they're just, ramping themselves even further up if they just come out of a hard class with caffeine. Like caffeine is, we know it's going to probably dehydrate us a little bit more. You know what I mean? So again, from that side of it, it's not going to be great. Again, it's putting us into more of a ramp state. So again, our nervous system is going further up into that kind of state of sympathetic dominance. And it's not going to put us in a place to rest and digest. And if I finish a hard workout, I want to think about, okay, well, can I calm myself down and actually focus on recovery? When I finish my run, I'll go for a dip in the ocean, calm myself down, and then, I'll have a banana, have some electrolytes, and then if I want a coffee after, okay, cool, I'll have a coffee after. But I'm not going to go straight to the caffeine. It's like I want to hydrate, replenish all the stuff that I've just lost, because I probably sweat my ass out. I need to replenish electrolytes and get my body back into a state of like homeostasis before I start playing around with that. Otherwise, you're probably going to do that, and then you'll find yourself crashing in the afternoon. That's where a lot of people, they get that energy slump in the afternoon, where they just kind of push themselves so hard into that like stress state as such. Then it's like the body be like, okay, we'll get to a certain point. We need to kind of go back the other way into that parasympathetic state where our body's just like, wow, I feel so tired. And that's when most people get that hit.
So if you want a coffee after you train, try and get some protein and carbs in first. Is that
Absolutely.
the advice?
Yeah, protein, carbs, calm yourself down, protein, carbs, and have coffee a little bit like 30 minutes after or something like that. Most mornings I'll probably have a coffee around about like 10, 11 a.m. That's about me. I don't try to have anything before that.
Perfect, mate. You mentioned the C word there, Dave, carbs. we've had, on the podcast before, we've talked a wee bit about the carnivore diet, ketogenic diet, which is low carb, high protein. If you're a relatively active person, should you be eating carbs?
100%. And I haven't got anything against the carnivore diet ketogenic. And I think it does get a lot of shit online. And I think there's a lot of people that kind of fall into these groups where they've got like a kind of like cognitive bias towards these things. And I think, people will get a certain result with something. They'll be like, this is amazing, because they've got that cognitive bias towards it. And in the right scenario, these types of diets can be a fantastic tool to overcome some ailments and issues.
So what's the right scenario?
Cool. Good. Glad you asked the question. So I had a client in the UK, fibromyalgia, which is a really interesting autoimmune type disease we don't know a lot about. But a carnivore diet with that reduces inflammation and seems to have a really positive effect on someone with fibromyalgia. And again, I can't tell you why, but I'm assuming because it's the low inflammatory diet around that, it seems to work really well with that, and some really good research around that. Martin McDonald, who runs MNU Nutrition, which is, again, a nutritional course, he posted some pretty positive research around this. So in that scenario, fantastic. But for a day-to-day healthy, active person that isn't overweight, carbs are going to be your best play when it comes to performance, and they shouldn't be ignored. And if you are ignoring them, you're not probably going to be performing or building as much muscle or being as strong as you possibly can be by minimizing the amount of carbohydrates you're taking in. And if we really want to get into kind of like, I guess, carb timing for performance recovery, we want to structure meals. It's like, okay, if I'm eating 4 meals a day, I'm going to have my pre and post workout meal going to be predominantly protein and carb, a little bit lower fat. And then the other 2 meals away from that are going to be a little bit more biased towards kind of protein and fats and like a little bit less carbohydrate. And that's a really good way of kind of structuring your meals if you want to kind of optimize your nutrition for not just performance and recovery, but just body composition and day-to-day kind of living as well.
A few things for us to work on in 2025, Dave.
That's it, man.
So your client aside and taking into consideration her ailment, are there any clients or athletes that don't need carbs?
And if we want to look at cognitive performance as well, we understand the brain needs, I think it's about 130 grams of carb per day to function. So just day-to-day cognitive function, like if you aren't getting enough carbohydrate in, you're going to see a drop in cognitive performance. It's really interesting. And again, that side of it is important. If we're looking at someone who's slightly carrying a little bit more, I guess, adipose tissue, or is a little bit on the kind of like overweight side of things, we probably want this human, if they're trying to get healthier, to get better at using fat as an energy source. So I'm probably going to pull this person's carbohydrate down and keep protein and fats high and bring carbohydrates down, because also there's an inflammatory response in the gut with carbohydrates as well, which we need to think about. And this is where, again, like ketogenic diets and things like that, people have really bought into it because, if you cut carbohydrates out, we understand you hold about 3 to 4 grams of water per gram of carbohydrate, right? So if your goal is weight loss and you cut carbs, you instantly lose a few kilos and you're like, this is amazing. The best diet in the world. It's like, you've just lost water weight. That's all you've done. But people have then bought into it. And this is the thing. They're like, this works. It's the best diet I've been on. Because they don't really understand what's going on. And that's where it's really important, I think, from an education standpoint, to really educate people you're working with and explain what is actually happening. And, I'm big on this. It's like, I'm really going to communicate the how, why is it what, so why we're doing what, so you can understand it, because then your implementation of it is going to be even better. It's my kind of role as a coach and educator to make sure I'm just not being like, what, Chris, you do this, follow me blindly. You know what I mean? It's just like, I want to make you autonomous in the fact that, okay, eventually you're probably going to not need me anymore. And that means I've done my job as a coach because I've given you all the tools and I've educated you to a point that you have autonomy in your own decisions, that I know you're going to continue to make positive progress. You understand the whys and whats with your nutrition, your training, to self-manage yourself. And then I don't need to do much of the coach. And you can be like, you know what, Dave, this has been fantastic. Thank you for your time. I can do this on my own. And you know what? I'm like, that's fantastic for me because I've done my job.
Perfect, mate. Dave, I know that you're someone who is constantly trying to stay up to date and across all the research within the industry. And as we spoke about in this podcast, the research changes, right? So that protein window that we previously talked about, that was like common knowledge and widely accepted about 10 years ago. And you just said it's fucking bullshit. What's the most interesting piece of research that you've come across more recently that might flip something that we commonly believe today and say, and we'll look back in 5 years' time and go, that was bullshit? Is there anything that springs to mind, or any other research that you've come across recently that that you think's interesting and might have legs in the future?
Yeah, that's a good point, Chris. I think there's been a lot around training volume at the moment. So training volume is going to be the amount of like sets per muscle group per week you are training. Okay, so when we look at actually making a training program, we're going to look at, okay, well, how many sets are going to be biasing towards like quads, glutes, hamstrings, etc. If we need to bring a certain area up or put more development in certain areas, we're going to put a bit more volume into these places. Now, I guess if we're looking at kind of like strength and hypertrophy research, actually lower volume work seems to be where everything is going, where in the olden days, it was kind of like, we're going to pump a fuckload of volume.
10 sets of 10.
Yeah, absolutely. GVT, gym and volume training, right? Huge. Like I remember doing that. Disgusting, by the way. And it's like now everything's gone down. Okay, well, you know what? Because of, and this is where we can kind of get into modern day society, because everyone is so much more stressed and ramped up and we aren't in a more relaxed state, we can't handle that amount of volume to get the same stimulus. All right, because it's more about, okay, well, not about the like we have minimum effective volume and then we have like maximum effective volume, which is again research driven. But what's more important is, okay, well, what is actually our maximum recoverable volume? So what is actually going to be, what is going to allow our bodies to recover, that's going to allow the adaptation of that training stimulus. So when we think about when we train, it creates the stimulus, we recover, we adapt. All right, if the stimulus is too big, it's going to take too long to recover, and then we're going to not get as much an adaptation. So now we're looking at, okay, well, actually, I work very much on like a 2-set principle. And if I train that muscle group, so you only need 6 sets per muscle group per week to create a positive training stimulus. So it means, if I do, say, 2 sets on a like Bulgarian split squat, and then I do 2 sets on the leg extension, I can put 2 more sets of a lunge later in the week, and that's going to be enough. As long as I'm training with adequate intensity, where I'm really challenging myself, and that's going to be 6 sets of my quads done. You know what I mean? And it's just like, I think nowadays it's like we need to think about, okay, well, how can I be more effective in the gym? So I'm minimizing the amount of time spent in the gym, but also having the maximum result. My body's able to actually recover from that, and I'm seeing a positive correlation between that and performance. And this is going to be obviously very dependent on the person to person. So it's like looking at lifestyle factors, are they spending enough time relaxing? Have they, got enough sleep? All these certain things. And that's how we're really going to create that kind of training program based on that. But yeah, that research for me was interesting. But it kind of makes sense in, like I said, the modern day society that we live in, where people are working more, they're a lot more stressed, people are running around, we're overstimulated, all that stuff. So I'd say most people are in that kind of sympathetic dominant state a lot more than we used to be.
That's music to my ears, mate. So what you're telling me for 2025 is there's going to be less Bulgarian split squats. Let's leave the podcast there. Thank you very much, Dave, for coming in.
Cheers, mate. Thanks, man.
Thank you.